Welcome to Afro World Women in Focus, a weekly talk show which profiles women who've made strides against all adversity. The women are from all walks of life and contribute significantly to society in various sectors. And the show is an interactive, informative, inspirational program to share our history, our victories and failures, to learn from one another and move the continent forward. Our Afro Worldview reporter Cindy Siwe Twala takes a look at the challenges and opportunities for women in aviation.
The face of the previously male-dominated aviation industry is slowly changing. Women are now staking their claim and joining the sector which many perceive as a male domain. Women have made great strides and contributions in the aviation and space sector. In recent years, Africa has seen growth in the number of female aviation professionals. They occupy various positions as pilots, aviation engineers, ground handling to managerial posts. Here on Women in Focus, we aim to highlight and celebrate these pioneers. However, women representation is still lacking at various levels of the sector. According to International Aviation Women's Association, less than 7% of the aviation workforce is female, and at executive levels, the figure drops to less than 5%. African countries such as Kenya, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, Rwanda, and South Africa are amongst the leading African countries making great strides in empowering women in aviation. They're offering scholarships and grants as incentives to lure young women into the industry. And these are bearing fruit, with women realizing that family and career management is possible in the aviation industry. For Afro Worldview, Cindy Siwe Twala.
And to elaborate on the challenges and opportunities for women in aviation, we're joined by Dr. Lumka Maneli. Dr. Maneli started her aviation career in the military, where she was introduced to aviation medicine shortly after her internship years. She later moved into civilian aviation, where she joined a medical department of an airline looking after health and wellness of flight and ground crew. She's currently a senior aviation medical examiner and is also the medical panel or appeal panel coordinator for the Civilian Aviation Authority. And we welcome Dr. Lumka Maneli. Thank you so much for joining us. Really lovely having women, especially in industries that you wouldn't ordinarily assume that women are prominent in that space. Just talk us through what was the appeal for you in getting into aviation medicine.
Thank you very much, Cindy, for having me here. I must say that my involvement in aviation was by default. It was not my intention. I was actually obviously not aware of this, and it's funny how I finished my medical degree without having heard about aviation medicine, which made me aware that it's a possibility that there are a lot of other doctors there who don't know anything about aviation medicine, even though it's been there for a very long time.
And it sounds very intense and specialized, as you're saying. There are various other, I suppose, disciplines that incorporate the wellness of your career, or rather what the provision of services. So how then do you put medicine as a general practitioner and now specializing in aviation? What are the dynamics there?
Okay. So aviation medicine, what it entails is a preventative occupational health, and you take this with clinical medicine and you combine with the physiological and psychological and mental impacts of men and women in flight, and to try and make sure that they are actually fit, because that's a very unforgiving environment, and it's actually not a natural environment for people to be working in. And there's a lot of other things, obviously, that comes with working in that environment, and we need to make sure that they are physically fit for the environment.
You were saying that as a medical doctor, you yourself was not aware that there are opportunities for women in aviation, albeit that it's still male-dominated. We always say the cliche, great strides have been made, and yet we know that statistically the gender parity is not quite satisfactory.
It's still like that. There is a lot that still needs to be done in terms of gender equality in aviation. And if I can take a step back and say, even in terms of race, actually, there's a lot of transformation that needs to happen in terms of black and white in aviation. To add that now, the females globally, not just even nationally, the statistics is very scary in terms of, you see other countries, even with us, you'll have 3% up to 6% presentation of even pilots, female pilots that we have globally.
Would that be also that there is a tendency of a concentration of a particular skill set where you'd find a higher concentration of women perhaps as flight or cabin crew attendants as opposed to progressing perhaps to a more technical profession or, a discipline like being a pilot or engineer?
Yes, I think so, because the cabin crew profession has been so feminized, and it has been the only a career within aviation that has seen a lot of women joining, and I think it's also because of the service, because we look at people who are there to service other people as opposed to people who can be more technical as well. So we see a lot of women going into flight attendant jobs, going for that for career, and also some of them maybe perhaps going for the glamour and how the whole career is perceived.
I mean, I have to confess, once a flight attendant was always a flight attendant. Vlieg as my lewe, as we used to say. And so in my previous life, being a flight attendant, and starting out, I think it was with the dispensation of the new dawn or democracy, and there was this perception or narrative that the quality of SAA, for example, and the service had gone to the dogs because there had been new entrants who were not necessarily the old guard or white cabin crew. How has it then evolved, in your view, in how women are perceived, especially black women in the industry?
I think I would really beg to differ in terms of the standards. I would think in terms of how people perceive the cabin crew, it also goes back to the image. Whereas in the olden days, there was a lot of effort that was put on how they're supposed to look and what is expected of women to do. And with the new dawn of democracy and everything, people learning more about the people's rights and stuff. The most important thing that comes out when you talk about the image, it becomes the weight issue, for instance, where people now find that we have, they see the cabin crew, especially in the African continent, getting bigger and bigger.
What I want to understand is, and again, these are the kind of prejudice or stereotypes that we look at. There's an example on Facebook where a flight attendant, black flight attendant, was assisting a white passenger with her child on a long-haul flight, and we know those can be very, traumatic for a young family. But my view is that your flight attendant or your black professional should not be pigeonholed to be a caregiver beyond what their professional expertise are supposed to be. What is your view?
My view, it goes back to the fact that what's always highlighted when it comes to cabin crew is the service part, when the safety always takes the back seat. Because when that story came out, and people who don't know what cabin crew are actually all about, and the fact that they are safety officers, they clapped hands and they saw it to be a good image, seeing a black professional woman with the child at the back. But my fear was that this still is a safety officer on duty, and if anything beholds happened, this woman is supposed to be taking care of all the passengers, and yet she has assumed another role of being a caregiver to this child whilst on duty.
Is that in line, though, with going the extra mile? Is that the expectation, and how do you mitigate that as a professional to say, excuse me, but this is how far my job goes. I'm not here to change diapers and what have you. I can assist you to make you as comfortable as possible, but essentially I'm a safety officer first.
Okay. So I think it goes back also maybe to their training, where we can focus also with the cabin crew on their self-awareness and also emotional intelligence, and also to be able to stand up for themselves. You can go an extra mile, but obviously there has to be limitations on that, where you don't jeopardize on the safety on the safety aspect of your job. And for me, when I looked at that image, that's what came to mind, that I think there's a safety that's breached now and where other people were actually seeing this to be a good thing, as this person was going an extra mile to provide a service. But yeah, it goes back to what I've said of the fact that the service has been what's been put forward, that cabin crews, this is their job as opposed to the safety.
Yeah. Okay. You also talked about other career opportunities that we either not aware of, or there is this concerted effort to block women from entering in this whole old boys club, etc. How then do you navigate all of those challenges?
I think what's important is that there are a few women who have managed to break the barriers that are there, to find ways of recruiting more girls and women, letting them know of different careers that are out there within the aviation. And because people, when you talk about aviation, they always think of pilots and cabin crews. And there's a lot of support staff that is on the ground. There are a lot of technical careers that are on the ground. You have your aeronautical engineers, you have your air traffic controllers, you have people in communication, people in safety. That these are all exciting careers. Even in aviation medicine, where other doctors don't even know that maybe this can also be an exciting thing that they can look into, and your aviation law and many other careers within aviation.
And are they accessible? Are there enough incentives, be it the incubations or internship programs, that would allow women who would ordinarily not have the opportunity access?
Lately, in the recent times, there's been strides that are taken to try and create that access for women to join in, because I know that, for instance, there are entities that are looking into that. But I find that maybe the efforts are not collaborated, and therefore that's why maybe the impact is not really felt, and the transformation is not happening at the jet pace. I think a lot still needs to be done, and maybe to coordinate the efforts. And I think it's time also for women who've already made into this industry to come together and come up with.
And I want to dispel this myth, Dr. Maneli, that women don't necessarily work well together. There tends to be these petty issues, catfights and professional jealousy or whatever it is, that while you were in your professional appointment, you also found another opportunity or a loophole, that there isn't an academy that deals primarily with you call it physiological challenges. Yes. Yeah, talk us through that program and how far you are in implementation.
So at the current moment, we have what we call aviation medical examiners who look at the physical fitness of the aviators. And we also we're making strides in trying to find out on how to support them in terms of their mental wellness. But there's also another missing element, which is the physiological element, on how do we prepare the aviators for this. And we used, in the olden days, we used to have a center where these physiological trainings were happening, and now it's no longer, it was actually part of the Defense Force thing, but the center is no longer functional. And I do believe that if we can have such a center, there's a lot of things that can happen with it, including research, including in finding solutions to the medical conditions, because we have moved so far where certain medical conditions were cutting the aviators' careers so short. And because of the research that has happened, mostly outside the country and outside the continent, we've managed to make sure that we can keep the aviators longer in their careers. And I believe with this center, we can also nationally or at home come up with research and learn more about conditions and their effect in the aviators.
Yeah, and as an entrepreneur, because you are a woman in business, albeit that you're a medic in aviation, how far have you been in not only galvanizing the necessary support, but ensuring that this particular center is implemented?
So it's going to go back to the fact that you're a woman, where you approach certain entities and stuff, and the first thing they see the woman. That's the first
beautiful woman.
That's the first barrier that you have to cross in mind when you feel like sometimes maybe you're not listened to, and people are just looking at you as being a woman. You feel like for your things to take off or your ideas to be listened to, you have to partner with males instead of finding other women that you can work with. So we've started to knock at different doors in terms of funding, because where we were with my partners was we've done a lot of background check and also background work, but the only thing that was a stumbling block was funding. And this is actually a barrier, funding actually, a barrier in lots of initiatives that are out there. For so many people trying new things to try to break the barriers in the aviation, and the stumbling block is actually most of the time the funding.
But you haven't given up?
I haven't. No,
Okay.
I haven't. This is the dream that I want to see through.
And how long have you been working on it?
It's been 4 years. It's been 4 years. So it was actually triggered by a trip that I took to Sweden, where I saw the whole physiological center there and what was happening, and I felt like at home we could have something like this, and we don't have to travel this far to actually, train our pilots.
So would this fall under a transport, for example, or would it be Airports Company South Africa? Who would be the strategic partner who would realize this physiological center that you talk about?
I think strategic partners will be transport, and it will be the airlines, because you also be training their pilots. And medically, I think also pharmaceutical companies can, because this is a center that can also look into testing their own medication, where the pilots and the cabin crew, they have a lot of restrictions in terms of what they can take. And some of the medication that they are not supposed to take or they are restricted from, it's actually not have been tested in that environment. And sometimes because of safety, we need to learn more about the drugs first before they can be certified as being safe to be used by the aviators.
And why hasn't there been an uptake in this, which sounds for me like the call for innovation to ensure that we deal with the uniquely South African challenges by having a tailor-made response to it? Why hasn't it had the necessary appetite or success?
I think mostly it was the issue of funding, where there are other projects that take priorities, looking at where also the country's at now. You look at where the need for funds is at. But it's also going to take a lot of pushing from our side to actually really show what will be the return on investment on this initiative.
Okay, so have you approached, though, those very key partners that you mentioned, pharmaceuticals, Department of Transport, etc.?
Not necessarily the pharmaceuticals, not the pharmaceuticals. Certain entities within the Department of Transport, yes, we have. But I think, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done from our side.
Yeah.
To get
What keeps you going, though, especially if you consider the long hours you have to put in, you're not available to your family? I imagine that the life-work balance is also a struggle.
I think what keeps me going is the love of my job. I think I really love, especially working with the crew, trying to understand. And when you sit with them and you learn from, because if you think about it, they are usually more away from home than anyone else. And the satisfaction I have when you've actually helped someone who was going through difficult times, because they do at times. Because the kind of job that they're doing, it can really take a toll in their mental capacity and stuff. So for me, the satisfaction comes from actually helping other people and coming up with solutions with the problems that have been identified.
And until you're in the industry, you don't know what the politics are or what the challenges are. All of it seems like very glamorous, the lifestyle of the rich and famous. You go to international destinations, stay in the best hotels. You also, not forgetting that you have a meal allowance in a foreign currency. It's almost a holiday, or while you're working, you're essentially on holiday. What are the challenges, though, or the difficulties that especially pilots and cabin crew would face?
It's funny that you mentioned that the glamour and the fact that people go to these places that are looked at, the best hotels in the world, where they seem to be slept. Because I once had an encounter with a young cabin crew who said nothing prepared her in the training for actually what the job entailed. she felt like she came because she wanted to see the world. But when she felt like the training didn't really prepare her for the challenges. There are a lot of challenges that they're facing. Number one, they are never there for their families. I'm going to say socially, so they are never there. So they come in, and before they can solve the problems that they have, it's time to pack and go again. So they are always living on the go. It can also be an isolated life when they get to these hotels away from their families, especially if they are going through some stuff themselves emotionally. The other issue is they start into this career as young as they are, 18, 19 years, and they go all over the world. The other issue that comes, it becomes the substance use in drugs, which becomes easily accessible to them. And being there with other cabin crews that maybe possibly have been there for longer, there's a lot of pressure as well in terms of maybe recreationally before, when they feel isolated, when they feel lonely, they will seek the drugs and
and I mean, there's a number of cases in recent history where flight attendants have been caught in peddling drugs or being mules. And as you're saying, this comes with the lifestyle or the fact that you don't have the maturity or the acumen as to what the job entails, and you may not even have been independent prior to that. I mean, the first flight I ever took or the first hotel I slept in was because of SAA. And I'm very grateful for that. But this is not the reality for a lot of young people who may want to get into the career, and there are all sorts of reasons why they're not, be it financially or lack of support. So how do we still encourage women, young people, to get involved, albeit there are all these other perils that they may face?
Okay. I think we need to look at their training. At the moment, it's more looking at the service and also looking at the safety and taking care of the medical emergencies that are there. But I think there's also need to be focused in building some resilience within these young women. And it becomes more importantly to make sure that really they get the support that they need in terms of their wellness. And because in my experience, I've seen also how those who actually are able to deal with the challenges, how they can move up in the aviation industry. There are people who are now holding management positions who started as cabin crew, and perhaps maybe this is another port of entry where we can introduce women. You know, sometimes you take what you already have to build something bigger. So we're saying that we want to introduce women in aviation, and this is another port of entry, the cabin crew, the career in cabin crew. And so if we can build in the resilience in them to deal with the issues, and also the emotional intelligence of not taking pressure as they go around the world. And the other thing is also there's also pressure of having more and more. And this is not just the cabin crew. This is now the new generations that we have of people who feel entitled, who feel that they need to have more of this and more of material things. And this also puts really a big pressure on them to acquire things, and they end up finding themselves, getting themselves involved in things that they shouldn't.
Yeah, so you're saying like it's a multi-pronged in the sense that they need to be not insulated, but you know that the necessary support is there. Let's talk about executive level, and we've seen this with the former board chairperson of SAA, Tutumieni. We've seen what some might deem a deliberate, almost orchestrated assault on black executives, and mainly so black women. What is your view on that?
I think also women, with whatever position, especially the higher they go, they have to prove themselves. You know, they have to put double the effort to prove themselves. And like I say, that we...
Yeah. Is there support, though, or would you say that there is malfeasance in that they are, you know, certain transgressions that happen, albeit that they may not directly be involved. It might be at a lower level of management, where then the executive is obviously held to account and they must fall on their sword.
Unfortunately, executives, they are always held accountable for things. Sometimes they, because they always have to be on top of things, of what's happening, or know what is happening in their environment. But it's not always possible, though. Certain things can go, they can happen, but they are ultimately accountable for whatever that has gone wrong, even though they were not really part of that, or they didn't have intentions of things going the way they went, but they still remain accountable.
Yeah, but yeah, so it's an unfair comparison to say because it's women that are in charge, therefore that's why things have gone awry.
No, I think that in all fairness, it happens whether it's a male or it's a female that is there.
And I know because, you know, of my history with SAA and yourself being there, that the common perception is that things, you know, SAA should essentially close shop. It's become a liability as opposed to being a national pride. Are you of the view that it should be privatized, or can you tell us the internal workings that certain systems are in place?
I truly believe with the new leadership that SAA is taking off into a better direction, and I really believe that we're going to see changes, and where SAA becomes the pride of the country again. And in terms of privatization, the only thing I can say is that maybe we should give the new leadership a chance and to see where they are going to roll this boat into.
Okay, so now you've taken another leap of faith into the Civil Aviation Authority. How's that been, especially in being the panel for coordination, etc.? How different is that from your medical aviation practice?
So every aviation medical examiner is designated by the Civil Aviation Authority. So in essence, from the beginning of your career in aviation medicine, you become involved in staff into the Civil Aviation Authority. So my involvement, it was just a progression of being an aviation medical examiner, and then you are also requested to also coordinate. So what it means is there is an aeromedical committee that sits and discuss challenged medical conditions on crew. Normally, aviation medical examiners in their respective practices will be able to determine if the person is fit or is not fit. But if in a case where there's a gray area or the person's condition really needs some specialist input, then the case is referred to this aeromedical committee. On top of that, Civil Aviation provides for those who are not happy with the outcome of the aeromedical committee to then go for an appeal, and that's why I come in. For some of those cases, then they get to be sent to me to look at, and I'm provided specialists in the that deal with the condition at hand, and we see if the decision of the aeromedical committee was a fair one, or maybe it wasn't.
It's a little bit above my head because, you know, it's very technical, but what you exude is that you're fulfilled. You know, this is a mission for you, that you want to make a difference.
I really want to make a difference, and especially, like I told you, how I got into the aviation medicine space. And for me, it was because I consider myself that I was lucky enough to find myself in this position, and also to create then an environment where we inspire more other women to come into this space and to see beyond just the aviation medicine, to realize that there are also other careers within the sector.
Yeah, we really enjoyed our time with you. Thank you so much for coming in here on Afro World Women in Focus. And that's our esteemed guest, the Senior Aviation Medical Practitioner, Examiner and Medical Appeal Panel Coordinator for the Civilian Aviation Authority, Dr. Lumka Maneli, joining us here on Women in Focus, only on Afro World View. And from myself and the technical crew, be abundantly blessed. Thanks for watching.